The sun was high above the human colony, casting sharp light on the metal roofs and dusty roads. People were busy shouting, selling food, and trading goods in the crowded marketplace. But in the center of this noise and movement, there was something that made many people stop and stare. It was a cage, a large rusted cage with iron bars standing on a wooden platform like some cruel display. Inside the cage sat an alien widow and her small child. Their skin was pale blue, marked with faint silver lines like cracked glass. The mother's eyes glowed softly, dim and tired, while the child's glow flickered weakly as if fading. Their clothes were torn and dirty, nothing more than thin cloth wrapped around their thin bodies. The woman sat with her back straight, holding her child close in her arms, her face blank like a broken mask. The child clung to her chest, silent, eyes wide with fear. Humans walked past them, pointing and whispering. Some laughed. Some spat on the ground. Others threw bits of trash at the cage. Soldiers stood near the platform with rifles on their shoulders, grinning like this was entertainment. One soldier even poked the bars with his gun, making the child flinch. The woman did not move. She did not cry or shout. She only held her child tighter. People treated them like they were animals. Some said they were dangerous. Others called them thieves, murderers, or spies from a dead enemy race. No one spoke of them as people. They were only a warning assigned to others. This is what happens when you are weak. In the crowd, one man stood quietly. His name was Kale. He was just a trader wearing a simple brown coat and carrying a worn leather bag of spare parts. He had no power, no weapons, no reason to care. Yet he could not look away. His eyes stayed on the small child, whose hands trembled every time someone shouted too close. The boy could not have been older than 5. Kyle saw the fear in his tiny fingers, the way his thin shoulders shook as he pressed his face against his mother's neck. Kyle's chest tightened. Around him, the crowd laughed again as the soldiers poured water on the cage. The water was cold and the child squealed. The mother only wrapped her arms tighter, shielding her little one with her body. The soldiers laughed louder. They wanted to see her break. But she stayed silent. She didn't fight. She didn't beg. She only protected her child even as her own body shivered. Kyle felt something stir inside him, something sharp and angry. No one else seemed to care. No one looked away from their business. No one saw the pain. They saw only something strange, something less than human. Kale saw something else. He saw a mother, and she was dying slowly in that cage. He stayed there for a long time, standing in the crowd, pretending to shop while his eyes never left the cage. He watched how the woman's lips were dry and cracked, how her arms were thin like sticks. He noticed the way the child's head drooped from hunger. He could almost count the ribs under their skin. They were not dangerous. They were starving. They were suffering, and everyone else found it amusing. Kale felt cold inside. He thought of leaving. He told himself this was not his problem. If he tried to help, the soldiers might kill him. The colony did not forgive anyone who helped alien creatures. They called it treason. Helping them was a crime, a death sentence. But as he turned to walk away, the child lifted his head. Their glowing eyes met across the distance, blue to brown. It was only for a second, but Kyle saw something in those eyes. It was not hate. It was not anger. It was not even fear. It was hope. A small spark of hope, as if the child still believed someone out there might help them. Kyle froze. The moment passed. The child lowered his head again. The soldiers shouted and the crowd moved on. The market noise returned. But Kale's heart did not calm. The image of that tiny face burned inside his mind like fire. He knew that if he walked away now, he would carry that face forever. He would hear that silence in his dreams. He could not walk away. For the rest of the day, Kale worked in silence, but his thoughts stayed at the marketplace. That night, as he sat in his small metal room with his cold dinner, he saw their faces again. The woman still, silent, broken. The child trembling and alone. He could almost feel the cold bars, the hunger, the quiet suffering that no one else could see. And somewhere deep inside, a decision began to form. He didn't know how. He didn't know when, but he knew this. He would not let them die in that cage. The next morning, the market was busy again. People shouted prices, children ran between stalls, and the smell of fried bread floated in the air. But Kale's mind was not on his work. His eyes kept moving toward the cage at the center of the square. The alien widow and her child were still there. They had not moved much. The mother sat like stone, holding her child close. The child's glow was even dimmer now, like a fading candle. Cale stood by a scrap metal stall, pretending to check wires while his ears listened to the voices around the cage. People talked freely as if the prisoners could not hear them. Her name was something strange, one woman said. Lyra? Laya? I don't know. Her kind talk and singing sounds. I heard she killed her husband, another man whispered. Their kind eat their mates. That's not true. Someone laughed. She was found near the mines. Probably stealing. Her whole species was destroyed, a guard muttered. They brought war. Now they're nothing. Kyle stayed silent, but each word felt heavy. Rumors. Lies. Nobody knew her. Nobody cared to know her. To them she was just a warning, a symbol of failure. A creature, not a person. But Cale could not stop wondering, who was she really? He started asking quiet questions. He visited the supply docks where traders came from distant stations. He slipped coins to drunk miners for gossip. He asked old workers who remembered the raids. Most shrugged. Some laughed at him for even asking. But a few told fragments of the truth like broken pieces of a mirror. Her name was Lyra. She had lived on a world rich with crystals and deep blue seas. Her people were peaceful healers, known for their soft singing voices and glowing skin. They had no armies, no weapons. Then the miners came. Humans. They wanted the crystals. They came with fire and machines. The peaceful healers had no chance. Villages burned. Many were killed. Some were captured. Lyra had watched her husband die in the flames. She had escaped with her newborn child, running through the smoke while soldiers hunted her like an animal. Kyle listened to the stories in silence, his fists clenched. He imagined her running barefoot across shattered glass, holding her tiny child, heart full of terror. He imagined her hiding in dark tunnels, singing softly to stop her baby's cries while soldiers searched above. He imagined the moment they caught her, dragging her out, throwing her in a cage like a trophy, and now, here she was, alone, broken, still holding that same child. When Cale returned to the market that evening, he saw her again. The sunset light painted her pale skin gold, but her eyes were still dull, lifeless. The child stirred weakly in her lap. A soldier threw a stale piece of bread into the cage. It hit the ground with a thud. She did not move. She had stopped reacting to anything. She was waiting to die. Cale's heart felt heavy in his chest. Everyone saw her as a monster. But he saw something else, something that shook him. He saw strength. She had survived all of it, the fire, the loss, the cages. She had stayed alive for her child. Even now, weak and starving, she still wrapped her arms around the little one like a shield. She had lost everything, yet she had not let go of her child. That was not weakness. That was courage. Cale could not forget what the old miner had said. Her kind were peaceful. They healed, not fought. That truth echoed in his mind louder than the market noise. She was not an enemy. She was a mother, and she was dying where everyone could see and no one cared. He watched her until the sky turned dark and the marketplace emptied. Lanterns flickered on the stalls, casting orange light on her face. Her eyes met his for a brief moment through the bars. Just a flicker, but enough. There was no anger in them. No hatred, only exhaustion. And a tiny, quiet spark of hope. That small spark pierced through Cale's fear. He knew he could not walk away now. But helping her would be dangerous. The colony treated aliens like poison. Anyone who touched them could be punished, even killed. The law was clear. No contact, no aid, no mercy. Even giving food was a crime. Kyle stood there, frozen between fear and compassion while the wind moved dust across his boots. He imagined her death. He imagined the small child alone in that cage, slowly going cold while people walked past laughing. Something inside him snapped. Kyle walked away into the night, but his thoughts stayed with her. He tried to eat but tasted nothing. He tried to sleep but saw her face when he closed his eyes. He kept hearing the small whispers, the lies people told about her, and he wanted to scream at them that they were wrong. She was not dangerous. She was someone who had lost everything, and tomorrow he decided he would not just watch. Tomorrow he would act. The morning air was cold, but the market was loud again. People rushed through the square, waving credit chips and shouting prices. Cale walked through the crowd, his coat pulled tight, his mind spinning. He wasn't really seeing the stalls or hearing the noise. He was only thinking about her, about Lyra and her child still locked in that cage. They were weaker than before. The child lay limp against her shoulder, his faint glow barely visible now. Lyra's arms shook as she held him, her breathing slow and heavy. The soldiers guarding them looked bored, as if this suffering had become normal. No one noticed how close they were to death. Cale's jaw clenched. He had spent the night awake, lying in his small metal room, staring at the ceiling. He had thought about everything, the laws, the guards, the punishments. Helping them could mean prison or worse. People had disappeared for less. And yet, no matter how much he tried to silence it, one question kept echoing in his mind. If I do nothing, will they die tomorrow? That thought made his heart feel like stone. He couldn't let it happen. He wouldn't. But he needed a plan. Kyle was not a soldier or a hero. He was just a traitor. He had no weapons, no power. He only had tools, scraps, and his quiet mind. If he wanted to save them, he had to be clever, faster than the soldiers, quieter than the laws. So he began watching. All day he stayed near the market, pretending to browse while his eyes followed the guards. He noticed how they grew lazy after lunch, leaning on their rifles. He saw how they argued over playing cards, turning their backs on the cage. He watched the timing of the patrol drones that passed overhead every 2 hours. He mapped every shadow near the platform, every gap between the stalls, every broken piece of fence that could become an escape path. Each small detail became part of something bigger, a dangerous, fragile plan forming inside his mind. By evening, the market was quieter. Cale slipped behind the food stalls where the smell of fried oil covered other scents. He opened his coat and pulled out a small packet of dried fruit and soft bread, his own dinner. He waited until the guards laughed at a joke, then stepped forward, quick and silent. He pushed the food between the bars of the cage. Lyra didn't move at first. She stared at him with hollow eyes like she no longer trusted anything real. Then slowly she reached out and took the food. Her fingers shook as she broke it into small pieces, placing each bite carefully into her child's mouth. The little boy chewed weakly, then blinked and looked at Cale. For the first time, Cale saw a spark in the child's glow. It was small, but it was life. Lyra's lips parted just slightly, almost like she wanted to speak, but no sound came. She only held her child tighter and lowered her head in a small nod. A thank you, silent, but real. Kyle felt something burn in his chest. Hope, dangerous, wild hope. He stepped back before anyone saw, his heart pounding. No one shouted. The guards were still laughing. The crowd didn't notice. He slipped away between the stalls like smoke. That night, Cale sat in darkness, staring at the stolen key on his table. He had taken it from a drunk guard days ago when no one was watching. Back then, he hadn't known why. Maybe some part of him already knew this moment would come. The small brass key glimmered in the dim light like a dare. Cale's hands trembled as he picked it up. Helping her once was already dangerous. But freeing them, that was madness. If he was caught, the soldiers would not just kill him, they would make him disappear quietly, without a name, without a grave. And yet when he closed his eyes, he saw the child again, glowing faintly, fading like a dying star. He saw Lyra still holding him, her body almost breaking but her arms unshaken. She had not given up. So he could not either. He opened an old map of the colony on his wall. His finger traced a path, from the market through the narrow alleys across the old sewer bridge and out into the wild forest beyond the colony walls. There were patrol drones and motion sensors, but also broken fences and blind spots. He marked them carefully. He memorized the patrol schedules he had watched all day. He noted the darkest time of the night when the moon would be hidden behind the colony towers. He whispered to himself, "It has to be then." A soft knock echoed on his door. Cale jumped, heart racing, but it was only the wind pushing loose wires against the frame. He exhaled shakily and smiled to himself, tired, nervous, but determined. This was no longer just an idea, it was a choice. Tomorrow night, when the moon was gone and the guards were drunk, Cale would walk into that marketplace with the stolen key. He would unlock that cage. He would carry the child in his arms and lead the widow into the darkness, and he would not stop running until they were free. The night was silent. No music, no voices, only the soft hum of power lines and the distant cry of wind across the colony walls. Above, the moon hid behind thick black clouds covering the world in darkness. Most of the market had gone quiet. Only a few broken lanterns flickered near the closed stalls, their weak light barely reaching the center platform. The cage was still there. Inside it, Lyra sat like a ghost, her head low, her arms wrapped around her sleeping child. The child's glow was faint but steady now, thanks to the food Kyle had slipped them the night before. The guards were nearby, leaning against a wall, laughing and drinking from metal flasks. Their rifles lay carelessly on a crate. A card game was spread on the ground between them. They weren't watching. They had stopped believing anyone would care enough to try. But someone did. Kyle moved through the shadows, each step slow and silent. He wore black cloth over his coat and rubbed soot on his face to dull the shine of his skin. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, but his breath was calm and steady. He had memorized every path, every corner, every sound from the night before. He had spent all day preparing, hiding tools inside his sleeves, wrapping his boots with soft cloth to muffle his steps. Every part of him was ready. Failure meant death. But so did doing nothing. He waited near a pile of broken crates, watching. One guard laughed too loud. Another dozed off against the wall. The patrol drone passed overhead, its red eye scanning the square and then fading into the distance. The timing was perfect. This was the moment. Kale slipped forward like a shadow. He crossed the empty square, his steps soundless on the dusty ground. The cage stood silent, cold and rusted. He crouched beside it, pulling the small brass key from his pocket. His hands trembled as he pushed it into the lock. It scraped softly, too loud in the silence. He froze, heart hammering, but the guards kept laughing. He turned the key. Click. The lock opened. For a heartbeat, he could not move. He had done it. He had opened the impossible. Then he breathed out slowly and pulled the door wide enough to slip inside. The metal creaked, a thin scream that made his blood run cold. One of the guards paused in their laughter. Kale froze in the shadows. After a few seconds, the guard shrugged and returned to his cards. Kale exhaled shakily. He crawled inside. The smell was sharp, cold iron, old dust, and hunger. Lyra's eyes opened slowly. She looked at him without fear, only confusion. Her lips parted, but he raised a finger to his mouth. "Quiet," he whispered. "I'm here to help." For a long second, she just stared. Then gently, she shifted the child into his arms. Kale felt how light the boy was, almost weightless, like holding a fragile bird. The child stirred but did not cry. Lyra stood, her legs weak and shaking. Kale reached out and helped her stand. Her hands were cold, her skin like ice. He guided her out of the cage. The air outside hit them like freedom. Kyle led her across the empty square, staying in the deepest shadows. He walked slow and careful, holding the child close. Every noise felt too loud, the distant wind, the soft scrape of their feet. Behind them, the guards kept laughing, blind to the miracle happening only steps away. They reached the far side of the square. The alley waited like a black mouth. Kyle signaled her to follow. They slipped into the narrow path between buildings where the smell of metal and oil was strong. Pipes dripped cold water onto the stone. He kept them close to the wall, moving fast but silent. Once, a rat darted across their path, making Lyra flinch. Kale stopped, waited, listened, then moved again. The alley led to the old sewer bridge, a rusted walkway over a dry channel. It creaked under their weight. Kale's heart jumped, afraid the sound would reach the guards. But no shouts came. Only the wind answered. They crossed quickly. Beyond the bridge, the last wall of the colony loomed ahead, high, cracked, and crowned with electric wires. But Kale had found a broken section days ago, hidden behind stacks of junk. They reached it now, a hole just wide enough for a thin person to crawl through. Kyle handed the sleeping child back to Lyra, then pulled away the loose metal panels. "Go," he whispered. Lyra stared at him, her glowing eyes soft but unsure. For the first time, Kale saw fear, not of him but of hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope could be broken. But she nodded slowly and crawled through, holding her child close. Kale followed, pushing the metal back into place behind them. And then, silence. They stood in the wild forest beyond the colony, the air cool and sweet with the smell of leaves and earth. No buildings, no guards, no cages. Only open darkness and stars peeking between clouds. Kale dropped to his knees, his chest heaving. Lyra stood still, staring up at the sky like she had forgotten it existed. Her child stirred in her arms, eyes glowing softly again. For the first time since he had seen them, Cale heard her voice, a soft, broken whisper like music. "Thank you." It was only 2 words, but they carried the weight of worlds. Kyle stood, breathing hard, and gave a small smile. "We're not safe yet," he said quietly. "But we're free, for now." The forest was dark and silent. Cold mist curled around the black trees and the moon hid behind drifting clouds. Kyle led the way through the wet leaves, his boots sinking softly into the moss. Behind him, Lyra walked slowly, cradling her child close to her chest. The boy's glow was faint like a fading ember, but it was stronger than before. He was breathing steady now, alive, but they were not safe. Behind the colony walls, chaos had already begun. Cale knew it. He could almost hear the alarms echoing across the distance, even though the forest was silent. By now the guards would have found the open cage. They would be shouting, calling patrol drones, sealing the exits. The colony would be hunting them, and if they were caught, they would not be brought back alive. Cale moved fast but careful. He had spent years trading in these borderlands. He knew where the old supply paths crossed the forest. He knew which streams led to dead ends and which cliffs were too steep to climb. He followed the path only animals used, hidden under the roots where the drones could not see. Lyra said nothing. She moved like a shadow, silent and watchful. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and her arms never loosened around her child. Even when her legs trembled, even when her breath came in sharp gasps, she did not stop. She had survived fire and cages. She would survive this too. They walked for hours. Branches scratched their faces. Mud clung to their boots. The night was endless. Then, a distant sound broke the quiet. A low hum, faint but sharp. Cale froze. He knew that sound. "Patrol drone. Down," he whispered quickly. They dropped behind a fallen tree just as a red light swept across the forest. The drone floated through the branches like a metal insect scanning the ground. Cale held his breath. Lyra curled her body around her child like a shield, her face pressed into the moss. The red light passed. The drone moved on, fading into the night. Kyle let out a shaky breath. "Too close," he muttered. They waited until the forest grew quiet again, then moved. Faster now, cutting through thick undergrowth. Cale's heart pounded. The forest seemed alive with danger. Every crack of a twig made his stomach twist. Every shadow looked like soldiers waiting with rifles. As they climbed a rocky hill, Lyra stumbled. Cale caught her arm. She was cold, her body shaking. She hadn't eaten in days. He stopped under a stone ledge and helped her sit. The boy whimpered softly, hungry and tired. Cale pulled a small pouch from his coat and gave them dried fruit, his last food. Lyra broke it into tiny pieces, feeding the child first. She chewed only what he left behind. Cale watched her, silent. Even here, hunted and starving, she put her child before herself. Something deep inside him ached at the sight. When the boy finally slept again, Lyra looked up at Cale. For the first time, she spoke more than a whisper. "Why? Help us?" Her voice was soft, musical, but broken from silence. Cale hesitated. Words stuck in his throat. Finally, he said, "Because no one else would. Because you deserve to live." Lyra stared at him, eyes glowing gently. Then she gave a small nod and said nothing more. They moved again before the moon returned. Kyle led them down into a narrow gorge where black stone rose like broken teeth. It was cold, wet, and hard to walk, but it hid them from the sky. They followed a thin stream that glimmered faintly in the dark. Each step echoed softly off the stone walls. Hours passed. The forest grew quieter but not safer. Kyle knew the soldiers would not give up. He could imagine them tracking footprints, scanning for heat trails, flying drones through the trees. The colony hated weakness. They would not allow an alien to escape. They would hunt them until they were sure she was dead, but Cale would not stop either. He kept them moving until their legs shook. Then he found a small hollow under a cliff, hidden behind roots and rocks. It was just big enough for the 3 of them to crawl inside. Cold water dripped from the ceiling, but it was safe. Cale pulled scraps from his pack, old cloth, dry leaves, and built a small nest for the child. Lyra lay him down gently. The boy curled up, glowing softly in the dark like a tiny star. Cale covered the entrance with fallen branches, then sat near it, his back to the stone, his eyes sharp and awake. Lyra sat across from him, silent, watching him with tired eyes. In the soft glow of her skin, Kyle saw her face clearly for the first time. She was not a monster. She was young, barely older than him, her face lined not by age but by grief, and yet she had not broken, Kale whispered, almost to himself. They think you're weak. They don't see what you really are. Lyra blinked slowly, her gaze calm but unreadable. Then she closed her eyes and rested her head beside her child. Outside, the forest slept. Inside, Kale stayed awake, listening for footsteps that might come. They had survived the night. But the hunt was only beginning. The first light of dawn touched the forest when Kyle opened his eyes. He had not really slept. He had sat all night by the hollow's entrance, clutching a metal rod like a weapon, listening to the silence. The silence had teeth. It felt like something was holding its breath, waiting to strike. Lyra was still asleep, curled around her child like a living shield. The boy's glow was soft and steady now, stronger than before. Kale felt relief, but it was small. They were alive, but not safe. They had to keep moving. By now, the colony must have sent soldiers. Kale imagined them tracking through the woods, scanning with heat sensors, releasing hunter drones. He knew they would not stop. Not until they were sure Lyra was dead and the human who freed her too. Kale touched her shoulder gently. We have to go. Lyra's eyes opened, glowing faintly in the pale light. She nodded without speaking. Her strength was thin, but her will was solid. She rose silently, holding her child close, and followed Kale out into the waking forest. They moved fast. Leaves dripped with morning dew. Birds scattered as they passed. The air smelled of wet earth and cold fear. Kale led them through tight paths between roots and stones, over fallen trees and shallow streams. Each sound made him tense. Every rustle of leaves sounded like soldiers. After hours of walking, the trees thinned. The roar of water reached their ears, low, deep, powerful. Kale pushed aside a curtain of vines and saw it. A river. It was wide and fast, crashing over black stones and churning white foam. The far bank was lined with tall silver grass that danced in the wind. Beyond it, freedom waited, uncharted wildlands where the colony had no laws. If they crossed, they could disappear forever. But between them and that freedom stood death. On the near bank, soldiers waited. There were 8 of them, spread in a half circle, rifles raised. Their black armor reflected the pale morning sun. Behind them hovered 2 patrol drones, red eyes glowing like coals. They had been waiting. They had known this was the only way out. Kyle froze. His stomach dropped like stone. His mind raced, searching for any path, any chance. But there was none. The river was too wide to cross under fire. The forest behind them was crawling with more soldiers. This was it, the trap was perfect. The soldiers stepped forward. Put the creature down, one of them barked. And surrender. Lyra gripped her child tighter. The boy whimpered softly. Kale stepped in front of them, arms spread. His body shook, but his voice did not. She is not your enemy, he shouted. She did nothing. She just wants to live. The soldiers laughed coldly. She is a threat, one said. She is property, another spat. She is a monster. Kyle's heart pounded. He felt the weight of their guns aimed at his chest. He knew they could kill him in a breath. But he stood firm, feet rooted to the earth. No, he said loudly. She is a mother. The soldiers hesitated, surprised by his defiance. Kale's voice grew stronger. You put her in a cage because she was weak. But she survived everything you threw at her. She's stronger than any of you. The soldier captain raised his rifle. Move aside, human. This is your last chance. Kale didn't move. His hands trembled, but he lifted them higher. If you want her, you'll have to kill me first. Silence fell like a blade. The river roared behind them. The wind howled through the grass. The soldiers stood frozen, their fingers tight on their triggers. Lyra stood still, glowing faintly, her eyes wide. She was ready to die. She had been ready for a long time. But then, a small sound cut through the silence. The child stepped forward from her arms. His tiny legs shook. His glow shivered in the air. He looked up at the soldiers, eyes full of fear and courage. Please, he said softly, his voice trembling like a bird's wing. Please don't hurt my mama. The words were small, but they crashed like thunder. The soldiers stiffened. Their rifles wavered. One of them blinked fast, looking away. The captain's jaw tightened. The drones hovered silently, red eyes flickering. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Kale looked at them all, his voice breaking the silence one last time. She is not a monster. She is a mother. And you are about to kill a child's last hope. Something cracked in the air. One soldier slowly lowered his rifle. Then another. The captain's eyes flicked to the boy, to Cale, then back. For a long, heavy moment, no one breathed. Then with a sharp motion, the captain raised his hand. "Stand down," he said. The soldiers hesitated, then obeyed. Rifles lowered. Drones pulled back with a soft whir. The red lights faded into the trees. Kyle exhaled shakily. His whole body trembled. Lyra stood frozen, her eyes shining like wet glass, her arms wrapped around her child. The boy's glow was bright now, bright like hope. Kyle looked at her and nodded. "Let's go." Together they stepped into the cold river, the current tugging at their legs. Behind them, the soldiers stood still and silent, watching without stopping them. Kale held her hand tight as they crossed. Step by step they reached the far bank. They were free. Cold water clung to their clothes as they stepped out of the river. Kyle's boots were heavy with mud, and his arms ached from holding Lyra steady against the rushing current. The child clung to her neck, glowing faintly in the soft morning light. Behind them, the soldiers still stood on the far bank, silent shadows watching. None moved. None fired. The wind carried the sound of the river and nothing else. They had crossed. They were alive. But the journey was not over. Kyle led them up a grassy slope beyond the riverbank, away from the soldiers' eyes. The tall silver grass whispered around their legs as they climbed. Sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time, spilling golden light across the wild lands. The air smelled clean, no oil, no smoke, no rust. Just earth and sky. Lyra paused halfway up the hill and looked back. Across the river, the colony walls rose like gray teeth against the horizon, cold and hard. The place where she had lost everything. The place where her people had burned, where her husband had died, where she had been caged and mocked while holding her child. She stared for a long time, silent. Then she turned away. Kyle said nothing. He just kept walking, his eyes scanning the land ahead. He had heard stories about a hidden settlement out here, beyond the reach of colony patrols. A place where outcasts lived, humans who had fled the system, refugees from broken worlds, survivors of forgotten wars. It was their only chance. They walked all day. Through silver fields and thorny woods, across dry gullies and mossy stones. The sun climbed high and began to fall again. Lyra never complained, never slowed, though her legs trembled and her arms shook from carrying her child. The boy slept most of the way, his glow soft like a warm lantern against her chest. By evening, Cale saw smoke rising from a distant hill. Not black like burning fuel, soft and gray like cooking fires. His heart lifted. They followed the smoke until they reached a valley hidden between steep cliffs. There, scattered among the rocks, stood a cluster of small wooden huts. Lights glowed in their windows. Children's laughter echoed faintly through the cool air. Humans moved between the huts, carrying baskets, repairing fences, feeding animals. They were simple, tired, but alive. Cale stopped at the edge of the valley. "This is it," he whispered. Lyra stood still, staring down at the huts. She held her child closer. Her glowing eyes were unreadable. Fear, hope, disbelief, all mixed like storm and sunlight. She had lived too long in darkness to trust the light so easily. Cale saw her hesitation and spoke softly. "They are not like the colony. They don't care what you are. They only care if you are kind. And if you are tired of running." Lyra's eyes flicked to his, searching. Then slowly she nodded. They walked down into the valley. The humans looked up as they approached, wary but curious. Some reached for tools like weapons, but Cale raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. He spoke quietly with an old man who seemed to be the leader. The man listened, frowned, then looked at Lyra and the sleeping child. Silence stretched. Then the old man sighed and said, "If you've come this far, you can stay." Kyle felt his shoulders sag with relief. He turned to Lyra and smiled faintly. She stood like a statue, as if afraid to breathe. Then the old man stepped aside and waved them in. And just like that, the hunt was over. They were safe. That night, Cale sat by a small fire outside the hut they had been given. He watched the stars bloom above the cliffs. The forest beyond the valley glimmered silver in the moonlight. For the first time in many nights, there was no fear in his chest, only quiet. Lyra sat nearby, feeding her child warm soup from a clay bowl. The boy giggled softly, glowing bright now, brighter than ever. He reached for the flames, and she gently caught his hand, smiling. It was the first real smile Cale had seen on her face. It changed everything. She did not look broken anymore. She looked alive. Kyle caught her glance. For a moment their eyes met, his brown, tired, and human, hers glowing soft and strange and full of new light. She gave him a small nod, full of meaning he could not put into words. Gratitude, respect, trust, maybe even something like friendship. She whispered softly, "We will not forget." Kyle smiled. "You don't have to," he said. "You just have to live." The boy curled up in her arms, glowing gently as he fell asleep. Lyra wrapped her cloak around him and leaned her head against the hut wall, eyes closing at last without fear. Kale watched them for a long time, until the fire faded to soft embers and the stars wheeled slowly overhead. They were no longer prisoners. They were no longer prey, they were a family, and under the silent, endless sky, they began again.